I'm Dan Smolen. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit, so that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to What's Your Work Fit? Happy October. We've made it to fourth quarter, and hopefully fourth quarter spending that we can use for wonderful projects at work. I hope you're all doing well. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this community. We're talking about community today on the show. I could, and I should say we could not, my fellow co-hosts and I could not have built this brand without your viewership and support. It means the world to us. So if you haven't done so already, please engage with What's Your Work Fit. We're on two platforms currently. We're on LinkedIn Live. You can find us at What's Your Work Fit. We are also on YouTube at the What's Your Work Fit channel. You can use those two platforms to watch us live, but you can also, if you follow us, use them to watch pre-recorded programming, past shows, clips, and also read written content that we leave on the subject of work, future of work, workplace, and transformation, and other things. And one more thing, if you like what you are experiencing here at What's Your Work Fit, do this for us. Tell 5 friends to subscribe today. This is how we build a meaningful community. Again, there's that magic word again. We'll get into that momentarily. So thank you again for helping to build this community out. We are starting our 3rd year this week. So happy birthday to us. Okay, it is my pleasure to welcome our guest today. He is Gary Bolles. How are you, Gary? Coming in here from Amsterdam today.
Yeah, that's currently where I am on a 5-week lecture tour throughout Europe. So really happy to be here. I'm going to do my best to be even more interesting than guest number 257.
Very good. You are in one of my favorite cities. You know, as somebody who's played in future of work and workplace, it is a fun playground of ideas in Amsterdam. So I can only imagine how much fun you're having there. Before we bring in our co-host, let me tell you a little bit about Gary. First off, he is the author of the book, The Next Rules of Work. He is chair for Future of Work at Singularity University and the new Global Fellow for Transformation at Singularity University. He is a globally recognized speaker on work and workplace issues and the co-founder of Next CoLabs and eParachute.com. That's a lot on your plate, sir.
Yeah, I call it a portfolio of work. So you have to practice what you preach. And the whole idea is just knit together the pieces that fascinate you and where you feel like you can have the best fit in the work that you're doing.
Wonderful. Well, you're our first guest this season on our What's Your Work Fit in the Workplace series, and it is my pleasure to introduce our co-hosts today. First up, Mark Gilbreath. Mark is the founder and CEO of LiquidSpace. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm well. It's good to be back, Dan, and wonderful to be with you, Gary. I wish I was in Amsterdam today.
Yeah, we all. And last but not least, the managing principal for Mortevita, Francis Saele. How you doing, Fran?
Great, Dan. Good to be with you, and also to meet Gary. And Gary, I know you're on the 4-week tour, but you did take a bar to Greece, I heard, just a few minutes ago. And I'm glad you wrapped in some pleasure with some work.
Well, and work as well there. It was a marvelous conference just outside of Athens. So we try to sort of meld these things together in our work portfolio.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, I teed up the magic word community, so I'm going to get right to it. Our topic this week is informed by a lot of the decisions that are happening in companies large and small, some of which have created edicts to bring back everybody to a co-location, or in the case of Amazon, several co-locations. And that is the idea of community. And so I want to ask you, Gary, is the future of workplace a community? What are your thoughts on this?
So first off, I think it's always important to be recognizing when work has shifted really dramatically. And I don't think any of us would question that what I call the great reset of COVID has encouraged all of us to rethink a whole bunch of facets of work. Right? And so in my book, Next Rules of Work, I talk about sort of the 6 aspects of a job, the 6 W's, what you do for work, where you do it, when you do it, how you do it, with whom you do it, and why. And so we focused a lot on this where and when, and that became flexible work or remote work or distributed work, depending upon your favorite label. And so the idea that work could have some flexibility to it,
right,
and that you then have to explore a variety of different questions, the 6 W's about your work, to make sure that you've got a good work fit. And so the opportunity to be thinking about how organizations, especially the people within organizations, and how they're connected to each other. I think during the COVID era, we've had to just step back and realize we used to think of the workplace as a physical location that people came to, often after a mind-numbing commute.
Yeah.
And we did that for a number of reasons. We did that because that was the best way to aggregate humans when there weren't easy ways for humans to be able to connect and collaborate unless they were in person. And we did it because often there's this historical framework for organizations that we call hierarchy. And we would stick a whole bunch of people into a building, and then it would reflect the hierarchy of the organization. So I'm a big fan of questioning all of that. Hierarchy, a lot of people don't realize, goes back to the time of Alexander the Great.
Really?
The best communication technology at the time was a carrier pigeon. And somebody in charge, Alexander, would give an order, and for it to reach the far-flung edges of his empire might take a year or two. And so you needed to have structure. You needed to tell 2 people, and they would tell 2 people, and it needed to actually carry all the way through with this. It can't be a game of telephone that maybe you played when you were a kid, but it has to be where the orders that are given all permeate throughout the entire infrastructure of the organization. And so that's a model that in the modern era, post-industrial, post-World War II, many organizations still sign up for, even though they don't even question that operating system, that structure for organizations could itself use a reset. And the same thing with the workplace, which I often call a workspace, is we have to rethink the structure of organizations, how people are connected to each other in the organizations, connected to their work, and then how we organize and self-organize within that structure. And so sometimes people, especially heads of HR, their heads explode when I say a lot of that stuff is flexible, and we should be rethinking a lot of these things. But I actually believe we are co-creating what those next rules are going to be.
Mark, lead us off.
Thank you. Gary, in the Next Rules of Work, you talk a lot about not just employer, but employees. And I think objectively today, employees have more choice than they've ever had about where and when and how they work. But it seems that employers often still overlook those individual needs when they're setting or resetting, Amazon, for example, workplace and workspace policies. What are or what should the new rules of employee first workplace be?
So that's a great question, because when you ask questions, you always have a framing, right? And so we can take it from the hirer, the person paying for the work, or we can take it from the perspective of the worker and the one contributing for the work, or we can hopefully co-create. But I always think of this as like a table. It's like, it's power dynamic, right? And so if everything's in favor of the employer, and the employer gets to set the rules and set the compensation, that sort of thing, then the worker's less advantaged. And if everything just advantages the worker, and it's not done in co-creation, in collaboration with the organization, then you get out of sync, right? You don't have synchrony in the organization. So from the perspective of the worker, I mean, what do each of us want? We normally want to be able to have access to meaningful, well-paid work. We want to either find that work or we want to create it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of simple. It's complicated in the implementation. Mm-hmm. And so when, especially you guys talk about work fit, you can think of, all right, so there probably are some optimum characteristics for what I want. And if I know what those characteristics are, especially if I've done what we often call self-inventory, I know my own skills. I know my favorite skills, the ones I'm best at, and I'd love to use, what I call superpowers. I know the kind of people that I like to work with. I mean, all those W's, I know what's optimal for me. And if I have a good sense of that, then what I I is to be able to have a work environment where there's a really good overlap. So fit, I often think of in terms of almost like a Venn diagram. And the better you know as a worker what it is that you thrive, the conditions under which you thrive, then you're in a better situation to be able to help to co-create that with the person that's paying you. The challenge, unfortunately, is that we learned in a very short period of time during COVID, all of us could adapt overnight. When you've got existential risk to your job, existential risk to your organization, it turns out as humans, under the right combination of incentives and disincentives, we can change on a dime. But it was pretty predictable. I mean, I wrote about this in early 2020, that once those conditions changed back, many would bungee cord back to the old rules of work. And so that's what I think of when a lot of employers, you became successful because you worked your way up a hierarchy, you worked in a workplace, those were the old rules. I mean, that's how you were successful. And then people like me come along and say, no, you should be more flexible, and you should really incorporate a lot of the ways that people can actually do their best work, and stop just sort of doubling down on the approaches that you get a lot of resistance. You often get a lot of resistance. I'm not saying all organizations, but that is how I think about it, is the old rules of work we've sort of bungee corded back to, and yet there's a whole range of workers that had the taste of being able to be more flexible.
Right.
And Gary, when you, just a quick follow-up, and then we'll throw it to Fran, but quick follow-up, when you see an organization come forth, in 2024 with a reset mandate to return to the office 4 or even 5 days a week, what do you see in that action? How do you interpret that management motion? I mean, you talk about bungee jumping back to the old rules, but what do you think they're really thinking? What are they solving for? And is it any different than what the headline reads as?
Right.
Yeah. So great question, because again, we're asking, so the framing is just to step back and ask like really basic questions, right? So in the same way that many people who lead organizations don't really realize this history of hierarchy, and that we've sort of you go to do a startup and you start putting hierarchy in place again. I mean, really? I mean, thanks, Alexander, but I don't know if the world exactly operates the way that it used to. It's the same thing with a lot of the sort of framework of how we think of work and jobs. So, for instance, 5 days a week for work. 100 years ago, there was a factory, a clothing factory in the northeastern United States, and it had a bunch of workers who were Christians and a bunch of workers who were Jewish. And the people who led the factory said, you know what? You should both get your day of rest off. And so that actually was the first place that a 5-day work week was practiced consistently and infected the rest of the world. And so why 5 days? I mean, what is it? What's the magic? And the answer is that's what we know. And then a 40-hour week, well, that actually came about through a series of laws in different countries. And there's still a range, but the whole idea was, let's sort of box what it is that people do in traditional jobs and the average job, and then have a certain number of days a week. So again, don't want anybody's head to explode, but if you step back and you say, well, wait a minute, what are the problems that we're asking people to solve? And what are the skills they need to bring? And what's the amount of time that they need in a given week? And what if we empowered, the team to decide what they need to do and where they need to be and when they need to do it? And there might be times during the year where, we all got to work a lot harder, got to deliver a product, got to do something for our customers. And then there's other times of the year, and I would say summer in Europe, where, hey, guess what? Don't have to work that hard. Let's not do that. And so again, we're trying to encourage people to be far more flexible in how they think about that process of designing work fit. And that requires a new mindset. That requires just a completely different way of thinking about how you're constructing that operating system for your organization.
Fran, what you got?
Gary, in the foreword of your book, one of the first things you write about is that humans have been worried about the future of work since the dawn of the machine age, which I found kind of be a fascinating question or a topic. And then you go through how that's changed over time to the point where now you're looking at 3 futures of work: future 1, future 2, and future 3, which I'm sure you can articulate much better than I can. But my question is this: when this anxiety with work and relevance emerged in the last century, the pace of change was still fairly slow.
Right.
And work was changing, but very, very slowly, along with the industrial manufacturing environment, I guess.
Yeah.
Today, it's just the opposite. We have technology-driven change, which is exponential, but we have people that are living their lives at the same pace.
Mm-hmm.
Effectively. I mean, they grow up, they get married, they have children. All that's on the same pace, and yet work has gone off the chart. So how does the society reconcile those two drivers and the pace of both of them? And going forward, what do we do with all the people that don't have work?
So great question. So just so that to give the listeners sort of the framing is the first technology to transform work was the ox-driven plow. You did a whole bunch of stuff with your manual labor, and then along comes this technology that brought 2 changes. The first is you could 10x your own work as an individual. You could easily plow 5 to 10 times as much of a field as you could before. Awesome. Massive transformation. The other thing that it brought, and there's actually a recent article written by a researcher at MIT, it says it was also the first step in separating human labor through technology from the people who owned the technology that could 10x work. And so if you couldn't afford an ox, you couldn't afford a plow, you didn't benefit. You had to become the person, often a guy, who was helping to draw the plow, but you got paid a lot less than when you were doing it with your own labor. The Luddites in 18th century England, who railed against loom weaving machines and destroyed them not because they were upset that they weren't able to weave fabric anymore. They were upset because they had to tend these machines, and they got paid crappy wages by the people who owned them, who were often rich. And so you get this, right? And so now we got robots. We have large language models. We have AI that continually separates humans from work. And if you own those technologies, you do great. And if you don't own them, you're kind of subject to them. So how do we fix that? Or rather, how do we make sure that humans continually benefit as much as possible? We can have a long conversation about how I talk about hacking our peculiar form of our economies. this whole idea that the way that we reward the economic systems can be changed, and especially to benefit work. But let's focus instead on how we help humans to be able to continually adapt better. That's why I use the framing in my book: mindset, skill set, tool set. Very likely that the pace and the scale of change, especially technology-fueled change, but also by world events such as the pandemic, is not going to slow down anytime soon. As a matter of fact, it's likely to keep accelerating. My friend Shelley Palmer has a great line. He says, today is the slowest day of the rest of your life. You're going to be telling your kids, your grandkids, I remember when we didn't stick a chip in the back of our heads and summon a self-driving flying car, right? And so humans are going to need to figure out how they can adapt to the pace and the scale of change much more effectively. And so it means a mindset where each of us is prepared to be able to continually change, a growth mindset, variety of different aspects of mindset to explore, a skill set that allows us to be able to continue to leverage these new tools, and a tool set that benefits more and more of us so that we can adapt and change. Turns out this AI tsunami that we're all experiencing actually has some really, really good benefits that could help people learn more effectively and more rapidly, allowing us to overcome some of the limitations of our education systems, which are many, which were all designed for that industrial era period, and could help each of us to be able to understand our own skills and develop skills far more rapidly.
So just to follow up on the 3 futures of work, you believe we're going to wind up at a future of work 2 rather than 1 or 3.
Yeah.
And what assurances can you give those who are nervous about it that will actually happen?
So just to make sure people sort of get the framing, is there's a possible future of work, which is there's abundance. Tons of work, all these new tools allow us to be able to solve completely new problems. Everybody is able to find or create meaningful, well-paid work. Awesome. We're all happy humans. There's a future of work that's exactly the opposite. All this stuff gets automated. Lots of employers lay off tons of disposable humans. They can't find work, and our societies don't step up to make sure that they can have a roof over their heads and be fed. So that's scarcity. That's bad stuff. And then there's a future of work where it's both. There are some people, awesome, doing great, adapting, using the tools. Other people couldn't adapt, couldn't leverage the tools, aren't able to find or create meaningful, well-paid work, both happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the data shows us right now, is that middle ground where both are true is the most likely to happen. What we all want to do then is to figure out, okay, so we can kind of see where the bad case could happen. We can kind of see all the dynamics of that, especially with our peculiar form of capitalism. How could we design a better future? How do we empower more individuals? How do we change our systems so that more people can benefit? All of that is totally doable. And we got plenty of examples from around the world where it's done and can continue to be done. It takes a collective will to do it.
Great. Thank you.
So, Gary, our shared dear friend Sophie Wade asks, how do you see projects increasing, becoming the unit of work rather than tasks or jobs? Interesting question, Sophie.
Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. Always great question. So, all right. So I said what I think a job is, sort of those 6 W's. Work is essentially, as far as I'm concerned, just 3 things. It's a problem to be solved. How do we solve problems? We have human skills. Mm-hmm. How do we use we have tasks to perform. And then how do we perform tasks? We have human skills. So it's human skills applied to tasks to solve problems, right? So it doesn't matter whether the problem is a dirty floor or a complex market entry strategy or a customer or employee acquisition strategy. There's a problem to be solved. And we have a lot of tasks that we often perform to be able to solve those problems. And then we have human skills that we are learning throughout our lives to be able to apply to those problems. And so again, traditional organizations tend to group a lot of problems under the heading of a job and as a job description, but it often describes the tasks, not the problems to be solved. And it sort of forgets even what the skills might need to be. It just says you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. And so it's a very mechanistic sort of industrial era model that we often use to describe work roles. And so Sophie asks a great question, because if we were again to step back and say, well, wait a minute, what are we really trying to do? We're all trying to create value for the organization stakeholders. That's what we're trying to do. We've got customers, we've got other employees, other workers, we've got our communities that we work in, we've got the planet. We want to create value for all of them. And how do we do that? We solve problems. And so what you would want would be a far more dynamic work environment. And it turns out that the organizations that have done this, and I'm happy to give you plenty of examples, but they tend to focus on problem-centric work, and they tend to focus on project-centric work, because structuring traditional jobs is inflexible unless you have something in the operating system of the organization that allows you to continually encourage them to adapt, to be able to have people working as part of multiple teams, to be able to continually find new projects that they can, where they can solve new problems. And so that is typically the atomic unit: teams, projects, and problem-centric work that the most nimble organizations follow.
Sophie agrees with you about future mapping projects and skills to solve problems. I want to continue on a similar frame here. And I got this question a couple of days ago in advance of us going live today, but Jen asks, who in an organization should own the role of community engager or manager? And I want to pair that with Sophie's question, because what often happens is maybe it's the team leader who is the owner of the corral, if you will, and the disseminator of all these really important questions that Sophie alluded to. What are your thoughts?
So I want to separate out. Thank you, Jen, so much. That sets up a whole bunch of ideas. So I want to separate out. There's the role of the person formerly known as the manager or supervisor or even leader. And then there's the community operating system, like how you think about community and the engagement and connection between people in the organization. So I want to separate those into two different pieces. When it comes to the role of that person, as you were saying, Dan, that leads the team, my friend Esther Wojcicki has a great book called Moonshots in Education. And she says the role of the teacher, that industrial era thing, construct, needs to shift from the sage on the stage, the one with all the answers, to the guide on the side, the one with the best questions. And so that's what I talk about for the person formerly known as the manager or the supervisor. I don't even typically use those labels. I talk about the team guide. So the team guide has a set of responsibilities. They need to know the mindset and the skill set of each person on a team. They need to be able to help them to continually dynamically bind around new problems. They need to make sure that they are synchronized in their work, and they need to make sure that they each hold each other accountable for results. That's what a team is. That's what a team does. And so a team guide should be that person that is helping that group of humans to be able to continually create the best value for the organization stakeholders. And hopefully that team guide also has the concept of work fit, as in, here's the way the work roles are constructed, here's the skills and capabilities and interests of each worker, and they actually co-create those roles together. And they do that as a team sport. So that's the transformation of the person who guides the team. What about that sort of community connection thing? So there's a, I'm not a mathematician. I don't even play one on TV. I sucked at math in school. But we often use set theory, Venn diagrams, which I use often, just one particular flavor of set theory. But the basic idea is that you have your degree of membership in a set is either 100% or 0. So you either are an employee of an organization or you're not.
Right.
And the old rules of work, that was common. It's, you know, you have a scarcity inside the organization. You've got that hierarchy, only so many work slots. and you've got abundance, lots of people looking for work outside the organization. And so what you would do is you would typically structure it, and you would have the whole mindset that if you're an employee, that's it, you're in, right? Well, we have all these different use cases for work, contractors and subcontractors and gig workers and part-time workers. And especially if you're in an organization that has lots of projects, well, then what's a job? I mean, you just exploded all that stuff. And so, and especially in a world of very distributed work, how do you think about social cohesion? Because if you've got a distributed workforce, or especially if you have these young people nowadays, I don't use labels like Gen Z and Gen Y. I think it's not a new generation. I think it's a new species. But you've got these young people that have completely different rules of work that they want to follow. And you add all that into the soup of trying to help people in an organization to connect with each other. That's why I talk about often the community operating system for an organization. And I'm actually working with a Brazilian software company to build software to actually empower this. But the basic premise is, in math, there is fuzzy set theory. And fuzzy set theory says, what is your degree of membership in a set? If it's 1%, you're probably the pizza guy who walked in to deliver pizza for a team so they could stay up working late at night, and maybe they came up with the next, massive product for the company. And if it's 100%, you are a full-time employee, but there's a spectrum of engagement, of a degree of membership in the organization. And when Gallup and other companies do surveys on engagement, which is not a word that I use very often, I instead focus on a degree of membership. How close do I feel to my work? When you say work fit, what is my feeling about that connection with my work? How close do I feel to my team, to my organization, to the work, the purpose of the organization? And all of those, there is a degree of membership. People who are at risk for leaving the organization have a low degree of membership. They don't feel that connection.
Right.
And that's why you get this optionality for a much more mobile workforce.
I'm going to get to Mark in a second, but I just want to respond to that because you've introduced probabilistic thinking into this. Not if something will happen, but to what extent might it happen? What are the odds that something might happen? I think that's very actionable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that framing. So increasingly, you asked the question at the beginning, is the future of the organization a community? So what are communities? We have communities of geography, which are the ones we know the most, where we grew up and, the schools we went to and that sort of thing. So that's one way that you get social cohesion is by geography. Communities of interest. We have communities of practice. We have communities of purpose. So that all of those have degrees of membership associated with them. And there is a probabilistic process you can follow, a deterministic process, where it's likely that certain people that exhibit certain behaviors or are absolutely all in, contributing to their work and feeling everything's working great, where you can predict the likelihood of that fit based on many of the things the organization is trying to do to try to create the kind of conditions under which those kind of people can thrive. And so that's actually one of the ways I encourage heads of HR, CHROs to be thinking about the portfolio of workers that you have. You've got this spectrum, and there is a strong probabilistic likelihood that those that are less engaged or the ones that are have the lowest level of engagement or of degree of membership with the organization are the ones that are most likely to leave. And you want to help everybody to move along that journey, along that pathway to increase the feelings of their degree of membership.
Mark?
Thanks. Gary, you introduced the framing of mindset, skill set, and tool set. I'd like to venture into a tool set or a possible tool set area for a moment. One major dynamic that we are seeing in this post-pandemic hybrid world is something that the Wall Street Journal described as the coordination tax. And in that article in June, they were referring to the friction that employees and team members feel when they're trying to plan their work rhythms, and in particular, if, when, and where they might gather physically in place with their colleagues. how do you see, from a tool set standpoint, how do you see technology and or innovative workspace models addressing that pain point?
Yeah, brilliant. So, so first off, one of the elements that you've uncovered is the whole idea that there's even a mindset by the people leading an organization that the cognitive and workload of that coordination is something that you want to provide a context or an operating system where people can solve it and solve it flexibly. And it's one of the reasons that you get this sort of bungee cording back to the old rules of work, because that's pretty static and structured in many organizations. And then
if I go to the office, Gary will be there. It's
he'll be there. He's gonna. This is the things he typically does. This is typically when we can do things. And then I, as the manager, supervisor, or leader, I have more control, right? Because then I get to choose. And when all of it is much more flexible, I have to co-create. I have to learn a different, not just mindset, but skill set of being able to help people to continually do that coordination process. Now, there's a part of it often breaks a tool set down into two categories. There's techniques and technologies. And we talk a lot about the technologies. We forget there are techniques in organizations all the time, from design thinking to calendar coordination, that sort of thing. Doesn't even necessarily involve the technology. What is missing in a world of more flexible work are the technologies that allow us to do that more flexibly, more accurately, and on a regular and ongoing basis. Now, there are companies like Asana that have built software that actually makes that process a lot easier. And so because the commitment, the mindset of organizations that implement these kinds of, Atlassian's another competitor, implements these kinds of software, what they're doing is they're essentially saying, all the activities that we're doing, we're going to put into software. We're going to have our calendars there. We're going to have projects we're working on. We're going to have where we are in our projects. We're going to continually report that in the software. Turns out it's a lot easier to be able to continually do that synchronization and reduce the cognitive and work overload that would normally be required. So it's actually quite doable with the right tool set.
Mark, you got to follow?
Yeah, I guess. So what role then, or what change is needed? So if Asana and Atlassian and other tools or technologies of that type are addressing some of the coordination aspect, when should Gary and Mark and Fran gather? What changes, if any, do you envision are needed in terms of the place or places that those gatherings occur? If the old world model was there's the corporate campus, that's the one place you always go. You're there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And if the new world model might be something more atomized or more distributed, what does that need to look like, or what do you see that becoming?
Yeah, really good questions. So there are, I think, part of the mindset for many people trying to figure these things out. I often say, look, there's a thought exercise you could do, and that is tabula rasa, clean whiteboard. Take the workers you have today, take the way the kinds of problems they solve and that sort of thing, take where they are geographically, and from a clean slate standpoint, what would be the physical assets that you think the organization needs to have? What do you need to buy? Like, what do you need to own? And then what can you borrow? Or what are the ways you can create more flexible workspaces for people? And it turns out that you'd get a lot of organizations making very, very different decisions based on uncertainty. So Fran was talking about the pace of change. Do we know that it's all going to be exactly the same in the future? Is it a good idea to invest in a massive corporate headquarters if we don't know that we're going to be able to get everybody to come in on a regular basis? And if we think of that as a process of co-creation, then what you're going to do is you're going to have a completely different approach to it. The problem is that many organizations that are mired or anchored in the old rules of work already have these physical assets. They've already got these big buildings. They want to basically maximize that investment and continue to amortize it over time.
Yeah.
And that's not clear that that's actually going to work for a lot of organizations. Now, the more an organization is in an industry that it, either embraces or encourages a little more of that command and control thing. So financial services, you get Jamie Dimon is able to say, nope, you're all coming in. Well, it's not Jeff Bezos anymore, but the Amazon leadership Jazzy is able to say, you're coming in. And then what happens is often a reset. Is the employees, the workers that are okay with that will stay. And then the ones, you've just sent a strong social signal. It's like, this is what we're going to reward, bungee cording back the old rules of work. You get resets. Tim Armstrong, who used to be at Google, was actually a client of ours. When he took over America Online, he said to the employees, okay, here's the way we are going to operate. Here's who we're going to be. If you want to work hard, if you want to help build that organization, awesome. If you don't, here's your package. 50% of the people quit or the teams were reorganized in a very short period of time because they could, they signed up for the agreement of what the new order was going to be. I think companies like Amazon are going to experience that. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the surveys. The informal survey said 75% of Amazon's office-based executives are looking for work. Is that true? Who knows? However, the the people who lead the organization just sent the signal. This is what we're going to reward, and if you don't want that, hey, you know where the door is.
Brian?
Thanks, Dan. Gary, Bezos would have never done that. Jazzy, is a temporary. Bezos still controls the stock. Anyway, it's sort of a follow-up in this area. We've been through the annual RTO September experience this year, with Jazzy and KPMG and a bunch of others who are they're going all the way. They're going all in now. It's going to be 5 days. My own view about this is that one of the we have a real estate industry that is encouraging everything to go back to where it used to be because they have a vested interest. But I do think that organizations who are not as vested in the real estate, the big problem that they have is management, middle management and senior management doesn't really understand what people are doing if they're not in front of them. It's a huge issue for a lot of legacy managers. And I'm always kind of baffled by the fact that we have the ability to digitize business process, to digitize the workflows associated with those, to create analytics that are so much more profound if it's done digitally than there's ever been done in a manual system, which most organizations still are there. I mean, they have this management, or they have this manual PDF of this is our business process, here's our process flows. But nobody really goes and uses there's no data there. But if they became digital, then everybody in the organization, all of management, would know everything that everybody's doing. And if you put AI on the analytics, you would have a treasure trove, a cornucopia of information. Why is that so much out of vote? Nobody talks about that. And yet the technology is available. What's holding it up? Because if you had that, then management's objection to distributed work would likely go away. They would know more about what's going on than if people were sitting right in front of them.
So you've highlighted a really key part of it that starts with mindset, right? So we talked about the role of the person formerly known as the manager, the supervisor, and in the past they were often compensated for control. They were often compensated that they had the team that they could see, and if their team was not in the office, that person in that manager role was often questioned, like, where the hell are your people? What are they doing? And so you've talked. So first off, it's a mindset shift. It's that you want to have the operating system for an organization that is much more flexible. And there's a variety of organizations. I point to Spotify as a great example that are actually have that operating system in place. They much more flexible. The whole idea is that they do want a lot of data about what people are doing, but that allows them the flexibility to be able to continually adapt. That takes training. That takes compensation. You have to change the combination of incentives and disincentives, and you have to help make sure that those team guides can be successful. So that's actually a process of transformation. That's helping them to go from that old model to the next model is not a matter of just saying what the new rules are. It's a matter of helping them to have the kinds of compensation that encourages them to do these things in new ways, helps them to be able to innovate, and empowers them to be able to learn this new skill set. And so the reason that organizations don't typically do that, there's a couple of anchors. The first is that at least in the US, only about 40% of jobs in the US have a strong information component. So you've got about 60% that have often a strong, or at least some element that's in person, and also that is not easily digitizable. And so we can say that there is a core use case of an information worker, and typically information, producing information that could be very, very flexibly supported by software. But there's a lot of other work roles that are maybe not so much, especially if you're doing machine tending or those sorts of things. And so, but even those organizations have found that they can push a lot of the decision making to the team, and then you get much more flexible work. And if you have digitized, then the communication about who's doing what and where, and especially the ability to have more flexible work roles, are all benefits that you get. The people that run many large organizations all were trained, developed, and had success with the old rules of work.
Right.
So the transformation process takes a couple of things. It either takes existential threat to the organization. So somebody is eating your lunch in the marketplace, and you better do something really, really different. It takes a very inspirational person or persons leading the organization that say, we're going to take that hill. Let's go. And they will take the slings and arrows from their shareholders at the cost of doing that, of training workers, of building more flexible work. Or it takes a palace revolt. It takes people throughout the organization, all from the grassroots, wanting to have this new operating system and building it themselves. And so there's lots of different studies. Each of those is possible. You can get good results. What you find is that the Institute for Corporate Performance did a study of these kinds of transformation, especially digital transformation processes. Bad news, 85% fail. Good news, 15% that succeeded. There's actually about 16 or 17 steps that they followed consistently, not in order, but that helped them to be able to transform. And I actually include a number of those steps in my book. But it's possible. What it takes is one of those three models: existential risk, inspirational people leading the organization, or people with more of the grassroots of the organization pushing for that change, or it isn't effective and you don't get the results.
Just to follow up there, you in your book, and by the way, this is a co-pilot summary, which is very helpful, by the way. I just got the book today.
All right.
We'll read it.
Thank you,
I'm
co-pilot.
looking forward to it. But it says that
ChatGPT is my co-pilot.
This is these were the key messages, and their fifth message was entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, which in effect creates this own element of change within the organization, I presume. And that fits right into what you were just talking about. Help us understand what that is and how that can be encouraged in an organization without being seen to be encouraging rebels to take over.
Right. Well, maybe you want to encourage rebels to take over. I don't know. It depends upon the organization. All right. So I in the book, I talk about mindset, skill set, and tool set. And then skill set, people just keep saying, okay, what are the top ones? Like, I'm going to force you. You've got to tell me exactly what the skills that you think are needed for 21st century work. I say, okay, if you're going to force me, I'm going to say, our research shows 4. Problem solving, being adaptive, being creative, and having empathy. So pace. Your friend, you used it, pace. Problem solvers, because that's why people pay us. That's what work is. Adaptive, because the world of exponential change you were talking about. Creative, human creative problem solving. Empathy, Satya Nadella at Microsoft says it's the human superpower. Okay, so now what does an entrepreneur do? They fall in love, empathy, with the problem of a customer, and they continually adapt using creative problem solving until they have an MVP, a minimum viable product. What does an intrapreneur do? An intrapreneur has the agency to find problems to solve and feels empowered to be able to solve them. And it's the same 4 skills over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer is, the more you want to be an innovative organization, the more you have to empower people. You've got to train them in these and other skills so that they can have the agency to continually find new problems and solve them. You and your team walk in and the floor is dirty. You could sit around and waiting for the groundskeeping crew to come in, or you could say, we can solve this. Like, why don't we? You and your team realize that you have customers, maybe it's even your company's next customers, that have a problem that is not being solved for them. And you look around and nobody in the organization is addressing it. Wouldn't you want to have the agency to address it? So that's the operating system that we encourage organizations to have. You must train, you must encourage that mindset of agency. You must develop and train for a skill set of pace, and you've got to have the tool set to allow them to be able to solve a range of problems.
That's great. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we have run out of time, and I'm so sad about that. One reason is that we got some really good questions in the queue. So, after the show, Gary, at your convenience, if you could go to the thread, the common thread, there's some questions for you that I know our valuable viewers would just love answers to. So we're at the end of the show. Before I get to my final question, I want to ask, where may our viewers and listeners find you on social media, and how can they engage you in a conversation?
Okay. So for a variety of reasons, including the fact that I've known Reid Hoffman since the dawn of time, I've done a lot of things on LinkedIn. I've got 10 courses with 1.5 million learners, and I've got a weekly newsletter. So, I'm kind of Bolles, Bolles everywhere, but LinkedIn is sort of the go-to for me. And I'm always open to any outreach. I've got about 15 to 20,000 people a month take my courses, so that's a great flow of perspective from people. So, but I'm always open to ways that I might be able to be helpful.
Wonderful. Here's the last question, my friends. So, Gary, what's your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a wonderful part of your day, doing many other wonderful and meaningful things, and not the all-consuming time suck of a day? What's your work fit, Gary?
All right. So first off, I mentioned I have a portfolio of work. I haven't had a real job for quite some time. And so it's the result of an advanced case of adult attention deficit. But everything fascinates me. So my answer, that's actually my answer. Yeah. I am curious about everything. This is far too short a conversation. I want to know about each of you guys, your background, how you got to this place. And so I'm curious about everything and everybody. I think every single person on the planet has some fascination about them. So a great day for me is where I learn something new. I find something I don't know, which is a massively long list that continues to grow. Anytime I can have some curiosity and I can satisfy some part of that curiosity is a great day for me.
Oh, I love that answer. We got to get you back at some future point. And point of personal privilege, I'm one orange line away from you on the metro. So you and I have got to meet up in real life in DC. That would be just wonderful. Thank you so much, Gary. Well, that's it, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Gary. Great show.
All right, guys. Be well.